In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Marianne's guests are leaders in their field, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in their own work. They teach others to develop, refocus, and grow. Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. And remember, make every moment count.
Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I am so excited to be introducing our first guest today, Lisa Smartt. And she's here today to talk to us about her new book, Words at the Threshold, What We Say as We're Nearing Death. So welcome to the show, Lisa.
Oh, thank you so much, Marianne. Great to be here.
Hey, it's fabulous to have you here. And when I heard that you did this book and then you had the foreword done by Raymond Moody, it really piqued my curiosity. It's quite an undertaking.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been an incredible journey for me. 5 years ago, when my father entered the active dying phase, the last few weeks of his life, I was completely intrigued by the language I heard from him in those last days. And my training was in linguistics, so I was particularly attuned to language. And my father, who was a complete skeptic, did not believe in anything that we would consider spiritual, began to speak about angels, began to speak in poetic metaphors and fascinating kinds of nonsense. And I was completely struck by the language. And that began a journey into learning about final words that also brought me to Raymond Moody, who's worked with me very closely on this project. And it's been a great honor to work with him and learn from him.
Well, there are a lot of books out there in regards to near death and the afterlife, and I was especially intrigued by this because no one's really done a book that talks about what people experience and what loved ones can expect when we get to those final stages.
Yes, and that's partly why, 5 years ago I was an educator. I had never in 1,000 years thought that I would be writing a book about final words. And what happened is after I witnessed the changes in my father's language, he was living in Berkeley, so I went to UC Berkeley where I graduated in linguistics, and I went to the department to research what had already been written on the language of end of life, because I assumed, we spend a lot of time studying the language of children and infants. There's articles upon articles upon the language acquisition of children, right? But So I went to the library thinking, I'm going to find lots that will explain to me some of the remarkable things I had witnessed in my father's language. And what I discovered is that there was almost nothing written. There is that terrific book by Maggie Callanan and Patricia Kelly called Final Gifts. And there were two hospice nurses that looked at some of the metaphors of end of life. But generally, there was nothing written about the language of our final days. And that's what motivated me. It almost possessed me. As if I just felt completely moved to do this work. And so I did. And that's what began the Final Words Project and the research that followed from it.
So, and that actually brings me to my next question. I've got quite a few questions in regards to your book. I felt it was a real inspiring piece of literary work, and both, Mr. Raymond Moody's foreword, and then your work in it as well was just really inspiring. So, when you talk about the Final Words Project, what is that all about?
Well, the Final Words Project was established in 2014, and by that time I had already met Raymond Moody at a workshop that he had given. And I was really very surprised to find out that one of Raymond's specialties that few people know about is he has spent 40 years researching unintelligible language. And it was actually his interest in nonsense, or what we call nonsense, right? Language that doesn't make sense to us, it was actually his interest in nonsense that brought him to the near-death experience. When he was a philosophy student, before he went to med school, he studied Lewis Carroll and different nonsensical writers, but he was just interested in the language of nonsense. So when he was in med school, his patients who died and came back started telling these stories of things that they heard about that on the surface sounded like nonsense. They were saying things like, it felt like when I died and I came back, it felt like a million years but 1 second. Or the people did not talk, but I understood people immediately. I mean, people said things that on the surface sounded like nonsense. So Raymond began to write it down because he thought, wow, this sounds like things you might hear in Alice in Wonderland. It's paradoxical language that is almost nonsensical. And it was his interest in nonsense that brought him to the near-death experience. And it was his insight into nonsense that brought us to work together, because he had heard what we would call the nonsense of people's final words, but had never really gone ahead and collected the data. So I was just delighted to have the chance to work really under his guidance to collect data through the Final Words Project.
What an inspiration. So as we kind of dive into the book a little bit here, how long did it take you to do the research to develop this book?
Let's see. I really, obviously the very first piece of data came as my father was dying. I wrote down everything he said, and from there on, whenever I had the chance, I started collecting people's accounts. So that began in 2012. And then 2014, I established the Final Words Project, and I created a website where I began to collect data more through the online, which is incredible, right? Just now that we have the internet, and I just began to speak to people, and the word got out. So really, in 2012, and it's still going on. I'm still collecting data because there's so much for us to learn, and I feel that the Words at the Threshold is really summarizes the findings of the first, 5 years, but there's still many questions, although there are many things I think we've discovered.
Yeah. So, I mean, we know that you're a linguist, and so I had no idea that Dr. Raymond Moody was into the, had studied 40 years in regards to other, just kind of other language. So it kind of makes sense that the two of you come together to make this book. When you started working together, was it more of a synergistic flow? Did he have great influence on how the book came into being? Was it just kind of a combination of both of your expertise that brought this together?
That's a really good question. In many ways, I would say that he really played the role as a mentor, and he was so respectful and honoring of my own kind of perceptions and sensibilities. So he never intruded in any way upon my work. He just said, "You're a linguist, you know language. You go for it." As I mentioned, I really felt, for lack of a better term, it was almost as the spirit of my father just inspired me, because I was living in California. I had a very good job with the county of Napa, a good secure job. And I was just ready to get early retirement. And I decided to sell everything I had. And my kids were already gone, after college. And my husband and I got into our Mustang.
It sounds like the California dream,
And Raymond was out in Alabama, and I just thought, what? How many people have the opportunity to work so closely with someone of his caliber and of his import? And I moved out to Georgia, and it happens that my husband is also from Georgia, and believe it or not, Raymond and he grew up in the same neighborhood in Macon, Georgia. We didn't find this out till later. So there were many synchronicities. But I moved out to Georgia, and it was more, I would drive to Raymond's house maybe one time a month and share the data with him. We would talk about it. He would share his wisdom with me. And it was just a very blessed, and it still is, sort of friendship and mentorship.
Yeah, I've met Dr. Raymond Moody once, and quite a few people that know him as well, and they all have, and I agree. I mean, he's just an amazing individual. So, in your book, you talk about final requests. So, how can that help bring us closure, and what is a final request?
Well, it seems when you're really looking at final words, in many cases, so not all, but in many cases, people really want to, it's as if we know as we're leaving that we want to make good. There's really this sense that it's almost, if we really want to make good and complete what we've done here. I mean, the sense of completion is so important. And it's so rare that our final words are angry or vindictive or anything like that. And our final request can be as small as, could you shave some chocolate on my tongue, which was my grandmother's final request, to, making sure all the family members are there. My father wanted to watch he loved the horse races, wanted to watch the horse races on television, right? So, but we find oftentimes people have kind of these lucid hours a day or a few days before dying that they call the sunset day, where people who may not have been lucid may suddenly have more clarity. And those are the times that they'll often say the words. For example, one hospice nurse described to me with her own mother that her mother had never said to her that she loved her. And during this time, right before she passed, she looked at Barbara and said, I know I never told you. I'm really sorry. I love you. Right? Or sometimes people ask for simple things like a quilt that they love that they just want close to them. Or, but the requests are often so simple. They're so simple, and they usually have to do with family and also the things, of course, that we've loved in our lives. In my father's case, he wanted to watch one last horse race. Right?
Yeah. Well, and that's what if there are things that we love, why not,
Exactly. Exactly. And it's really important to listen to those final requests, and sometimes they're veiled. Yeah, somebody may ask us something, and it may not be clear what it is. So sometimes you really have to listen to the metaphors and the symbols that the person might be speaking about. Somebody might ask for a certain kind of beer, or refer to a ladder outside the window, which symbolizes a person connected to that ladder. It might be cryptic, it may not always be clear, and so partly what we need to do with those we love is really keep our ears and hearts open and almost our imaginations open to what people are asking for.
And really just be there for them. Now, so for the families, when a family member purchases your book, how does that help them with the grieving process, to heal from that grieving process?
Well, what I do, again, I'm looking through all of this through the lens of a linguist. So I look at the kinds of language that people might hear and offer ways that people may approach it. So, for example, people may hear metaphors of travel, and they may talk about wanting to take the bus somewhere or needing their passport, and to realize that it might be metaphoric, that they're on a journey to perhaps another place, or at least their journey from this life, right? So, to listen to the metaphors, and for my example, my father, right before we really knew he was dying, announced about the big art show that was coming up. He used a metaphor. He said, it's the big art show, and I've got to carry your mother's boxes. But there was no art show. The art show is really a metaphor for the fact that death was coming. And we know that people use these kind of metaphors. So if people are highly tuned to, if you have a loved one talking about the big dance, please bring my dress for the big dance. to me, the most loving thing we can do is say, of course we'll bring you the big, your favorite dress, rather than say, are you kidding? What for? There's no dance. You're in a hospital, Grandma, right? So really, you want to step into the person's world, and use the metaphors. People might talk about the big golf game coming, or there's a dinner that they're getting ready to go to. Or one mother asked for her pearls because she's going to the big dinner. And it really honored that kind of language and be with your beloveds when they say things like that, rather than maybe, say, oh, you're not making any sense now. And it's a very sacred passage, I think, and the language reflects that. So we hear metaphors, we hear things that may sound like nonsense, but if you listen closely, many times what may sound like nonsense, well, in one case, is people oftentimes talk about loved ones that they speak, right, who had died before them. And they have conversations with them, and we know that from all the research, that 70 to 80% of people often see a loved one come to take them away. So one of the ways that family members can really help is to realize that there are certain patterns of language, and this is what my book talks about, that emerge at the end of life. And if you're attuned to those, first you may not be as afraid, because sometimes it can be frightening to hear Grandma start talking about things that seem like nonsense. But then you can also get into rapport and create a deeper connection between the two of you in those last days, or between, as the days go by.
It really allows us to be more present, not just for us, but of course for them, and allow it all to just be the way it's going to be, So it's going to be there and be more present. Now, in your book, you talk about ELDVs. What are those?
ELDVs. Those are end-of-life dreams and visions. And we find that people have very vivid dreams that are often about other folks who are deceased, and also about images around traveling and other things that have to do with resolving many of life's questions and issues. And then we have these visions. And what hospice nurses explain to me is that there are visions and there are hallucinations. And the hallucinations are often associated with medications, and many times people are more anxious or agitated when they have maybe hallucinations. But visions are things like seeing, your beloved who passed away 10 years ago standing by your bed waiting for you, or seeing a beautiful forest. My father kept saying to me, oh, the green dimension. Oh, I see this green dimension. And he started talking about the angels that he saw. Other people one father describes his daughter seeing doors opening and not sure which one to pick. So there are these visions that occur in those last days very often for people. And to me, they suggest there might be something beyond this life. Especially, my father, who believed nothing in angels, didn't believe anything, talked about, his eyes looked up as he pointed and started talking about the angels he was seeing. Yeah.
And being able to really have the veil that thin that he has a different perception. And then they're explaining things, like you're saying, in metaphors, and it's up for us to be just really open-minded throughout the whole process and just be there. Now, what if somebody is in a coma and unable to speak? How can we gain, closure and help in the healing process through that period?
That's a really great question. Madeline Lawrence, who's a researcher, wrote a wonderful book about coma survivors. And she interviewed people who were in coma and came out. And what is remarkable is, I believe it was 70% who indicated that while they were in coma, they could still hear people. And also many of them described having this capacity to be almost telepathic, that they were aware of things going on in the room around them. One woman described how she knew the doctor and the nurse were having an affair. How she was tuned into things. And People have near-death experiences talk about when they're in the afterlife, what we would describe as the afterlife, people speak telepathically, that there are no words spoken. There's just this kind of understanding. People, it's like between minds and hearts. And what Madeline Lawrence described in her research, and I've heard from others also who I've interviewed, is people in coma seem to have stronger kind of telepathic understanding, and are also very finely tuned to energy in the room. Mm-hmm. So, I think, of course, when you're sitting with someone who's comatose, it's horrifying because you think they're not here. It's really easy to think they're not here with us. But I really encourage people to just imagine, take that leap of faith that they can, and especially more energetically and maybe more telepathically. One woman shared this really wonderful story with me about her mother, who was relatively unresponsive, that she did have some language, but they used to have great conversations. But this one time she was sitting with her mother, and her mother was almost no response, but she just sat almost as if in prayer with her mother, and just, again, as you use the term, to be present with her, but almost imagining she was communicating with her in her mind, almost like we might when we pray. And she spent the whole hour with her mother that way. And then one of the nurses came in, and the nurse said, "Everything okay here?" And the mother actually responded at that time and said, "Oh, yes, I've had the most amazing conversation with my daughter." And, it's remarkable because there's indications that children and parents might communicate telepathically. There's some research about that. And it really might be that our most essential way of communicating is in a nonverbal way. And so it could be that those people in coma, if we make that assumption that one, they can hear us when we do speak. And of course, always touching people, physically is a great way to communicate. And also being almost in prayer with people in meditation. I really believe people can hear more than we might know.
Well, and, I've done and studied out-of-body experiences, and I know when we kind of dive into that world, it's very interesting because I've had like massages and things like that, been out of body and been completely aware of everything that's going on. So, it's nice, I think, for families to have, because I know you talk about comas in your book. I think it's nice to have that little discussion there about it so that they're able to gain some peace and do like you're saying, still, be in communication and touch and all those things. Now, in your book, I know you also talk about synchronicities, and there's one part of it you talk about electricity. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
I didn't expect to do a book on after-death communication. I thought I was going to just look at final words, but it was just the most natural evolution for it to go into after-death communication because people had so many stories to share. It was absolutely remarkable to me. And the electricity was one of the most common forms that people experienced their loved ones communicating with them. And one person described how, the flickering of lights right after her mother had died. And then at some point, all the electricity on the block where she was living went out. And you see synchronicities where someone, a brother had the lights go out in his house in Seattle while the sister had the same thing happen in another part of the country right after their father died. And electricity seems very responsive to the communications, if you want to call that, of our loved ones. And one woman shared how her beloved was in a rock band called Smoke. And when he passed away, her smoke alarm for several days was doing all sorts of crazy things. So it does. I know, is that remarkable?
I feel like, play with something else. Don't do the smoke alarm.
Yeah, anything like that. And it's funny too because more recently people are talking now about getting text messages in sort of cryptic language. I had 3 cases of people sharing text messages from their loved ones as they were dying or right after they died. And all 3 of these people I called, I just wanted to make sure they weren't making up the story. And they were all very credible
people.
Credible people. So there's a lot more going on than what we see with our 2 eyes.
Well,
here.
and how exciting. I mean, we are in a different age where text messages would be kind of an interesting thing, to receive messages from. I know when my father passed, I was having lights go on and off.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So, that and my doorbell was ringing. I'm like, okay.
Oh, right. The doorbell. We had a doorbell. Yeah, someone that I interviewed also had a doorbell ringing. Yeah, isn't that remarkable?
Yeah, so they keep kind of that, that fun-loving personality as they're going, but, after a while it's interesting to have that communication flowing back and forth. Well, Lisa, where can our listeners find you? I know your book is available in all major retailers, Words at the Threshold. So where can our listeners find you to kind of connect with you and learn more about your community?
Thank you. My website, the website is finalwordsproject.org. Mm-hmm. And people are welcome to also email me at finalwordsproject at Gmail. finalwordsproject@gmail.com. I always love to hear from people, and I love to hear accounts. I'm still keeping track of data. And those are the 2, and I have a Facebook page, of course, for the Final Words Project.
And I know that they can connect to that through the website. I did that myself. Yes. And
thank you.
Yeah, and sign up for your newsletter and get more information on what's happening in that community. Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today.
Thank you so much. It's been great speaking with you.
Oh, it's been fabulous. We're going to pause here for a quick break, and we will be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so excited to be introducing our next guest, Ryan Foland, and he's here today to talk to us about personal branding. So welcome to the show, Ryan.
Ahoy.
Ahoy right back.
Don't know. Well, here's a question for you. So if the first thing I say, and it's only one word that I say to you, and that happens to be ahoy, instantly in that moment, once your brain registers it, do you have any idea one of my hobbies?
It's not being deserted on an island, is it?
No, but I would get to and from the island on something that goes off of something that has a pretty high MPG. It's a wind per gallon.
Sailboat.
I'm a sailor. I love the sale, yes. And so first lesson on personal branding is that every single thing you say can influence your brand in a positive or negative way. You just have influence on it. So when I step into a large room or a small room, oftentimes, the first thing I'll say is, ahoy. It'll take everybody off guard. I'll tell them that it's pirate for hello. And now instantly with one word, they all know a little bit more about me, and it's my choice to communicate that. So branding is a fun and powerful thing. The rabbit hole goes deep, and I'm happy to hold hands and jump in over the next however long we have.
Yeah, well, and I'm so glad that we're spending this time here with you because you're like the go-to person in regards to communication. And I know you were like the top marketer last year by Inc. So, hey, congratulations for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was named one of the top 11 youth marketers by Inc. And then this year I was actually named by Entrepreneur as number 4 of the top 10 personal branding experts to watch out for in 2017.
Well, good. Then you're like the martial arts black belt guy in branding.
Well, exactly, and I also have a real black belt in real life, so that's a great analogy. Using visual terms and analogies and metaphors is the most powerful way to communicate, and it helps tap into what are called mental mind maps of neurons that are already formed from exposure over years and years. So if you use the word, hey, you're like a black belt for branding, that's 3 words that can communicate to a whole number of people instantly what I do. A black belt, they know that I put in time. They know that there's an art form to it. They know that it's probably something that is both self-defense and aggressive. And you yourself just basically tapped into one of the most powerful tools of communication, and it's speaking in relational terms. So you're already on it.
Well, hey, I've been following you on social media and picking up a thing or two here, so, and I know that, you run a very successful company that helps corporations and just individuals themselves with their branding. And one of the things you talk about is 313. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. A few years ago, I got asked to come and work at UCI, which is University of California, Irvine. We are one of the dominant forces here in Orange County, and I was brought in to run their undergraduate entrepreneurship center. And it was actually at the time funded by the Blackstone Group, which is the largest private equity fund in the world, and it was a partnership between Blackstone, a charitable foundation, and the campus. So I was front lines, boots on the ground, and in an 18-month period was able to help over 2,400 students start their own companies, build a mailing list of 15,000 people, got over 8,000 students involved in the program, and what it gave me was a hyper-accelerated exposure to early ideation. And imagine this, you have a scrappy freshman that comes in and sits down, and he's just super excited because he thinks this is the place to go to figure out his idea. And my first question is naturally, well, tell me about your idea. And then they take a deep breath. So here's what idea is over here. And I hands down, every single time, I would just end up sitting in the back of my chair, just trying to focus, trying to listen. And the more they spoke, the more confused I would get. And this was every single person with their idea. So I started strategically to ask different questions. And I said, well, before you explain your idea, can you explain it to me in the fewest amount of words possible? And they go, well, here's my idea. And I was over here, I was talking about a roommate, and just it was the same thing. So even if I cued them, like, let's keep it short, it didn't matter. So it got to a point where I started to stop them, and I said, so I'm confused, but all good businesses solve problems. So do you have a certain problem that you're trying to solve? And they'd think about it, and then they'd explain it in a shorter amount of period. And I'd challenge them, and I'd say, well, could you put all that together into one sentence? And then I'd sort of coach with them and work through them, and they eventually would be able to get to explain the problem that they solve in one sentence. And I'm thinking, okay, this is exciting because now that I know the problem, I'm very much prepped for the solution. And so I'd say, okay, now that I understand the problem, what is the solution that you're solving? And they'd ramble on, and I'd end up wrangling them down. Well, could you explain that in one sentence, and let's do some exercise to make that happen. And the final question was, who's your market, right? Who are you actually targeting with this? And most of them would say the two dirtiest words in entrepreneurship, and that's the A word and the E word. And if you don't know it, I'm going to tell you right now. And forgive me for saying this out loud, but the words are everyone and anyone. Your business is not for everyone. Your product is not for everyone. And here's the line of questioning. And I'd say, well, if it's for everyone, is it for an infant? No. Is it for somebody in North Korea? No. Is it for somebody on their deathbed? No. Then it's not for everyone. Who is it for? And can you explain that in one sentence? And so this real kind of fun banter back and forth. And what I discovered is that all I need to understand their business are answers to those three questions. Therefore, you can explain your business in 3 sentences. And I took it a step further and I went, okay, so you have this problem, you have this solution, and you have a market. How can we make it even tighter? And so I tapped into all of my inter-math black beltness, and I literally went back to, okay, so we have A, B, and C. How many different combinations of A, B, and C can we put together? Do you want to take a guess? You're any good at math? If you have A, B, and C, so A, B, C, A, C, B, what do you think? It's a number between 5 and 7.
Oh, that would be 6.
Okay. Mathematically, it's 3 factorial, and then that means it's 3 times 2 times 1. So technically, you can have 6 different variations of the letters A, B, and C. So if you take the problem, and that stands for P, and the solution, which is S, and the market, which is M, let's substitute those for A, B, and C. So now mathematics show that you have 6 different ways of combining the problem, the solution, and the market. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that means that a pitch that just started off as 3 sentences can now become 1 sentence said 6 different ways. Think about this for a moment. I solve this problem for these people, and here's how I do it. Here's what I do for these people who have this problem. For the people that have this problem, and this is what they need, this is what I do for them. So these same core 3 elements, the problem, the solution, and the market, you can explain yourself in 3 sentences. Then you can take those core elements, and you can say them all in 1 sentence 6 different ways, which is crazy. And it really kind of defeats the idea of this elevator pitch, because though I love the idea of having somebody have something prepared, when it's memorized, a lot of times it comes across disingenuous. Yes, and I always say, don't memorize, but instead prepare and improvise. And the 313, as we've explained it so far, you can explain your idea in 3 sentences and then in 1 sentence. And I thought to myself, can we whittle this down any more? And 3 is my favorite number because numerology says that's my number. And it's actually the highest number that most people count. And this is how we count. 1, 2, 3, many. That's it. Once you go past 3, you're going to lose people. There's a reason why there's 3 blind mice. There's a reason why there's 3 bears. There's a reason why there's 3 musketeers. Culturally, we identify with the number 3. And if you're giving a speech, don't talk about more than 3 points. We have a beginning, middle, and end. So psychologically, we're focused on this 3. So I thought to myself, what if I can get anybody's pitch down to 3 words? And I had a lot of naysayers at the time, but that actually just gets gingers fired up. And so I hustled on the idea, and I discovered it's not so much that you're explaining your business in 3 words. It's actually 2 words with a relational term. So it's the idea of tapping into mental maps and leveraging what people already know to get them closer to what you want them to know. And you had a great example. You basically said, well, Ryan, you're kind of like the black belt of branding. So technically it's 4 words, but let's look at black belt as a unit of branding. You say that to any single person. You say, I have a friend, and he is the black belt of branding. What do you think he does? In their mind, they've seen enough Jackie Chan or enough Bruce Lee, or they know what a black belt is. Hands down, within within a fraction of a second. And they have probably this idea of branding, maybe from a corporate standpoint or whatnot. They've been exposed to that. So within less than like a fraction of a second, you've prepared somebody in their own brain to start thinking about what you're doing without you making those connections for them. And you build the 313 in the process we described. Can you explain the problem you solve in one sentence? Can you explain your solution in one sentence? Can you explain the market in one sentence? Once you do that, you can take the core elements and in 6 different ways, you can combine a single sentence pitch. And then once you understand really the depth of what you're doing in those elements, you can now start to come up with relational terms of how they work together. So I sometimes refer to myself as the craftsman of communication or a blacksmith of branding. And if I were to say I'm like a washing machine of branding, it might not make sense, but in the instant you've already tried to make the connection. You're like, maybe he cleans brands up, maybe he does this, maybe he's like. So the idea and the most powerful, the highest level of communication is to get other people to think about your idea or come up with your idea before you tell them. And there's a reason for this. Nobody wants to be told because we've all had parents. Okay? Mm-hmm. We want to be in charge of what we think. And there's a reason why we watch edited movies. We don't watch the 1,000 hours of footage that gets cut down to the 2 hours. We watch the 2 hours. We watch the hour and 45 minutes. We like crossword puzzles, and we like to solve challenges and riddles. It's a challenge for your brain. So if you're sitting here and in one breath going, here's what I do, this is what I do, and this is what I do, and here, this is, you're telling somebody, and it doesn't resonate with them. But if you use the 313 to communicate it, it gets them thinking, because the more you talk, the less people listen. And the less you talk, the more people ask questions. And questions is what drives conversation, and conversation is what closes deals. So let me give you an example of how the 313 works in real life in, say, a networking scene. And I'm talking about business ideas, but this still works for your personal brand. I don't want to lose focus on that. And, your business means nothing unless people know who you are. And you should be solving a problem. And you should have a way that you're solving it. And you should know who you're solving it for, because it's not for everyone. In fact, as soon as you tell people, this is actually not for everyone, as soon as you say that, people start walking towards you. They're like, what? Why not? Is this good? What do you think? You don't walk into a bar and put your hands... Yeah, you don't put your hands up at a bar and be like, all right, I'll take anybody right now. Who wants it? No. You have to create some sort of exclusivity. So you build the 313 in that order, and you use it in reverse. So let's say that we meet for the first time, and I'll use your example, and I'll say, you introduce yourself, and you ask me what I do, and I say, well, it's actually not what I do that's important. All of a sudden you're going, it's not what I do that's important. It's the problem that I solve. That's what I'm passionate about. And the person who's listening will say, well, what problem do you solve? Now they've stepped a little bit closer to you, and probably physically, but also in this sort of idea of them being interested would be stepping in if I'm referring to it. Well, what problem do you solve? Well, it's what I think is the single biggest problem with early stage entrepreneurs. If they're interested, they're going to be like, well, that sounds interesting. Tell me more. Now, I haven't even told anybody what I do at this point at all, but they're still more interested than they have been since we started the conversation. And I would say then think of me as a black belt for branding. And in that instant, they start coming up with this relational concept in their head, and they have some sort of idea. Maybe they're 3 steps out of 5. And then when I explain that the problem I'm solving is, is that early stage entrepreneurs don't know how to communicate their value propositions in a succinct manner, which makes them lose millions of dollars and go out of business, then they might be thinking in the back of their mind, well, maybe he helps them out with branding and communication. And I say the solution I have is a system that allows people to create a pitch in 3 sentences, 1 sentence, and 3 words. And this is specifically for people who are out there in early stages raising money where it's life or death. So basically, for entrepreneurs who don't know how to pitch their value propositions, I've created a system that facilitates the process specifically for people who are looking at their bank account and deciding whether or not they can continue pursuing their goals. Mm-hmm. And there's an example of a conversation. I call it permission-based pitching, because the whole time they're stepping in and they're wanting to learn throughout the process. But at a certain point during that time, they will sort of make up their own mind and be like, oh, I get it. I totally understand that. Like, they'll jump to the chase, and then now you can have the real conversation. Now you can dig into questions. Now you can get to the nitty-gritty of it. So, that was, sorry if I'm talking about being brief, but that took a little bit of time to explain.
Well, do you know what? This is something that time needs to be spent on, though, because a lot of people, when it comes to personal branding, especially as new entrepreneurs, or maybe they're kind of stepping out in some kind of a self-employment setting, there's a lot of confusion about how I should present myself. The elevator speech, I think that era is kind of like dead, because people, like you're saying, it gets really disingenuous when people start rattling off something. You're just like, oh God, make it stop, So because I really love your approach. Yeah.
When you do the elevator pitch, you don't give people a chance to listen. But with this type of a concept, and for anybody listening, here's your one challenge, here's your one takeaway. Next time somebody asks you what you do, try to answer, it's not really what I do that is important. It's the problem that I solve. And then just let that sit. Let that amazing awkward silence sit. And 9 out of 10 times, somebody's going to go, what problem do you solve? Mm-hmm. And then you tell them, the problem I solve is the biggest problem that blank has. Then they're going to go, tell me more. You haven't even told them anything, but they're wanting to hear more. Like, that's a very powerful communication tool to get people interested. It
really is. Now, is that now the brand, when it comes to, kind of bringing it down to the 313 that you've developed, is that the number one reason that people usually connect with you and need your help when people start working with you on? Mm-hmm.
People think that they're a lot better communicators than they really are. And that's because they're talking more than they're listening, and there's a good chance that they're not getting the right feedback, or they're not listening to the right feedback. We don't want to admit that we have issues a lot of times. And if you feel confident and you're communicating and you have an ethos that you are putting out there into the world, a lot of times it's not going to be you as an individual who says, I need help with that. From a personal branding standpoint, what we're seeing is that baby boomers, as an example, who were very successful in their heyday, love to pound the phones, are great in person, give them door-to-doors and they'll crush it. But now they're losing contracts, they're losing deals, they're going out of business because there's younger people with less experience, less expertise that are landing the jobs, getting the contracts because they have more social proof.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, branding has always been around. If you think back to high school, who's the jock? Who's who's the popular one? Who's the dork? Who's the emo? Who's the gothic? And branding at the end of the day is the first thing that people think of you when they think of you, or the first way people describe you when you're not around. And to be able to harness control over that is an unprecedented amount of power in a world that you feel like sometimes you have no power. Right? I have no power what Google pulls up over me, but I have power about putting information out there that Google can find. And so typically the person that is somebody who comes to us for help is a C-level executive who is trying to get into the consulting world and can't break out, or a musician who is about to drop money on a new album, but they have no way to build that audience, to entrepreneurs that know that they have to be seen as an expert in their industry if they're going to develop an app around that expertise. or if they're going to be in the clothing business, you better hope that they are seen as a thought leader in that area. So that's more of a roundabout way of looking at how people come to us. And when they come to us, one of our first exercises, and this will be fun to share with your listeners, because the most valuable thing you can do as someone who's building your brand is give away as much information as possible. I'd like to debunk that right now. So many people think, oh, I've got this really good idea, or I've got this theory, and this is something that people could pay me for. So I'm just going to tease it out there, and then I'll charge them when they come to me. I am of the belief, give as much value as you can. Like each article I write, I try to think, is this $10,000 worth of value that I can give? And if it's not, how do I get it there? Because if you give your expertise online, people will see it. They might want more. If they see it's consistent, then they'll start to follow you, and they'll start to be excited, and they'll learn. And when it comes time for them to invest, they're not going to invest with the guy that just gave the teaser and doesn't really give what's going on. They're going to go with the person that has consistently been driving high value. So that's a side note for everybody. You've got to create content, and it's got to be crazy value. So one of the first things that we do in our course, and we have a personal branding course because physically we can't teach as many people as, we have limitations. So we developed this course, and we have some people who agree or disagree with our methodology, but we've seen so many people that have programs that you buy in full, and then basically, you get dropped all the lessons. Like here's 50 some odd lessons. That does not work because you get overloaded with information. You start one, start two, start three. You don't really focus on the first one, and then you just abandon the whole project. Mm-hmm. So we only allow our students to take one lesson per week, even if they want to go faster, because building a brand is not about where you are. It's about the process. And you don't want to just all of a sudden have hundreds of thousands of followers. You want to grow and people to see and follow you on that journey. So coming back to your original question is, do people come to you for communication help? I said no. It's coming from their want to have more social proof. But our first lesson makes them realize that they might not be the best at communicating their value. So I call it the personal branding starship. and it's an exercise. All you need are Post-it notes. So here's the short and skinny of it. And I would really encourage you to do it as well. It's a really fun exercise. Mm-hmm. The premise is that your personal brand is the intersection between what you think about yourself and what you want to be seen as, and the intersection of that with what people already think about you. Just for a moment, let's focus on this concept. It's not saying this is what I want to be seen as and I'm going to go convince the world. It's saying, what do I want to be seen as? And then what do other people see me as? And where is that common thread? Because it is a lot easier to convince somebody of something that they already know instead of teaching them something new. If you always know Ryan as that guy who's sort of loud and high ginger energy, it's going to be hard to change that. But if I want to be known as a speaker and an MC, it's a lot easier to say, hey, I'm loud, but that's because I'm this. And you can reinforce what people already think. So it's a really, your personal brand is closer than you think. So if you were to ask most people, what's your personal brand, they'll be the opposite of the person explaining their idea. They won't know what to say. And so this personal branding exercise, the personal branding starship, you take certain colored Post-it notes, like blue, for example, or pink, and you write down a stream of consciousness of words or descriptive words or phrases that you want to be seen as in the world. Then you take a different colored Post-it note. I suggest the traditional yellow color because people like it. And you pass them out and you say, here's 5 or 10 Post-it notes. I'm doing this exercise for my personal brand or my development or my growth or just a fun exercise I saw online. Can you fill out words or phrases that you think about when you think about me? I don't want to know it's from you. Just drop them in my desk or put them on my door, or here's a self-addressed mailed envelope. Get people that like you, that love you, that don't like you, that know you, that hardly know you. Workers, coworkers, even children, they give some interesting insight. And you give everybody like a time frame. You say, I'll give you a week and collect them. So now you have collected maybe from 10 people 5 Post-it notes. So let's say you have 50 Post-it notes and you have 12 of yours. Get a whiteboard or use a mirror or a sliding glass door and start to group all of the Post-it notes together. Loud, obnoxious, here, this, speaker, whatever, inspirational and outgoing, and he's a nerd, he's a dork. You'll start to see that there's going to be these clusters. Then you put your Post-it notes in the clusters that are relevant. And if you stand back, there's a lot of Post-it notes in little tiny clumps, and any clump that has both your Post-it note and somebody else's Post-it note, that's fair game. And what's exciting and challenging is that you only get to choose 3. And I suggest one of them makes you human. So you don't want to be all business all the time. For me, I'm a communicator, I'm an innovator, and I'm a sailor. That's it, right? It's not to say that you're not all these other things. But what it does is in that initial conversation, when somebody's meeting you and they're talking with you, you can communicate your brand sticking to those 3 things. What are you all about? I'm all about communication. Or I'm all about this. And the starship is almost like a drone because you can switch directions. You can lead with communication. You can lead with sailing. You can lead with innovation. And once people understand that about you, that's what they'll recognize you as. And as they get to know you, you can pepper in all the other things that make you great and glorious.
That sounds like such a great, just a project to do and get people involved. I know, and I wish we had more time. We're kind of almost out of time here. Where can our listeners find you so that they can connect with you? I know you've got the influencetree.com is one of the places that they can learn about growing their personal brand and get connected with you. Where else could they find you?
So of all social media platforms, Twitter is my favorite. Why? Because it's short, it's easy, and it's not Facebook. So those are like my requirements. But you can always go to ryanfoland.com, and then that can connect you with all of my other platforms. But I do spend the most time on Twitter, and I am very active on it. And on Instagram, my value proposition is that one of the things I like to do, as you get to know me, is I like to draw, and I like to draw stick figures. And I draw a stick figure quote every single day. Usually is inspired by the day, and I sit down and I think about a quote and how to. It's a great exercise for me. How can I sum up the day in a few words? And then I illustrate it. And so if you want kind of a fun daily inspirational quote that's hand-drawn by a Sharpie marker, that's my Instagram. If you want articles that I write and other information that I'd like to share and connecting with me on a more of a fast-paced level, Twitter would be the way. So my Twitter is Ryan Foland, and my Instagram is Ryan.Foland. So imagine the dot is like a Sharpie marker in between the two.
Little drawing as you go. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. It's really easy to see why so many companies and people are real interested in your message, and we just appreciate having you here today.
Hey, well, thanks. It's always fun. It gives me motivation to continue to learn the craft, because the best way to be better at anything is to do that anything more. So I love speaking. I always want to become a better speaker. So every time I speak, helps me be a better speaker. The way to be a better writer is to write more. The way to be better at your brand is to invest more time in your brand. So this is always a pleasure to be able to, off the cuff, share some of the stuff that's in my brain. And I'm probably going to go sit in front of a computer and hack out a bunch of thoughts now and turn it into blogs and see them online.
Hey, that's okay, because I'm following you on Twitter, so I'm going to see them. Yeah, I expect to see that. And for those who are tuning in, definitely go check out influencetree.com and learn more about personal branding that Ryan does. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today, and remember, make every moment count.
Join us next time for Moments with Marianne, when host Marianne Pestana brings another inspirational gifted leader to help us grow. Tune in every second Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Moments with Marianne, when the Dream Vision 7 radio network is at 1510 a.m. Boston. Or catch Moments with Marianne every Thursday and Friday at 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. Eastern Time by going to dreamvision7radio.com. To learn how Marianne started her business from the ground up, visit mariannepestana.com. Don't miss this, and remember, make every moment count.